only created as a representation of our own promissory obligations, which in turn then are obfuscated into falsified debts to the purported banking system, which falsified debts or evidence of possession in turn are only wrongly said to comprise risk, purportedly justifying interest. Obviously, if there is no lawful consideration given up by the bank, not only is there no actual debt to the purported banking system, no property of the bank, even exists as could be subject to risk, ostensibly justifying interest. To resolve these very intelligible questions, then, it is helpful, if not a reasonable obligation of the bank, to have the banking system's official answer. For if the banking system truly exists as a benefit to the people, as opposed to a device of their destruction, the former fact hinges upon whether the bank could rightfully launder principal into its possession, only upon which fact it could rightly claim interest is justified in multiplying otherwise falsified debts to the bank into terminal dispossession and failure. Obviously, then, we believe even that the bank has an indispensable interest in answering this question most conclusively, for otherwise the entire remainder of humanity would be compelled to recognize the greatest crimes against itself, perpetrated in fact by evident, purposed falsifications of purported banking. Very serious ramifications. A very serious and incredibly serious controversy between the Bank of England and people for mathematically perfected economy. All people for mathematically perfected economy, whether you realize you are one yet or not. Our fourth question again was, how is it possible even to maintain a vital circulation without accumulating inevitably terminal sums of debt? I provide this question again in a revised form for R. What is the prevailing recorded information then? Further hoping or purporting to justify any obfuscation of our promissory obligations by detailing how is it possible even to maintain a vital circulation without accumulating inevitably terminal sums of debt as a consequence of imposing interest against risks which obviously could not exist unless the principle of newly created money merely instead representing our promissory obligations is not even the rightful property of the bank, which it cannot be if the bank only claims falsified indebtedness without having given up lawful consideration. Humongous, monumental ramifications of these four questions. This is the contact of the Titanic with the fatal iceberg. I explain these questions, the fourth questions again, their pair, as follows. This question too is obviously intelligible and germane, as of course is already explained in our description of how the resultant obfuscation of our promissory obligations inherently produces the present global failure. In providing an accountable answer, recorded documentation would have to demonstrate how it is both possible and plausible to otherwise replenish the circulation. The questions, therefore, Mr. Norman, are indeed very serious and focused, and the stakes of the answers are no less than we have quite carefully explained. Moreover, Mr. Norman, particularly as we who are forced to assume the falsified debts can be aware of no commensurable property given up by the bank, it nonetheless cannot possibly be our cause even to oppose you if you confess what indeed appears to be obvious, self-evident facts, that we can resolve the resultant issues and move on as an intelligent, disciplined, and just public would. Are you unwilling to do that? Neither we nor our questions are going away, Mr. Norman. These questions will remain germane throughout all further ages, which will judge us on how the answers duly supplied by the Bank of England truly answer to any questions of justice and terminal failure, which questions of course are evident in everything around us. There are millions of reasonably concerned citizens already who are certainly interested in the vital answers to these questions. And certainly there will soon be billions more. For a world already bearing the weight of terminal sums of debt, which your obfuscation can only multiply further beyond us, is certainly at least doomed to wake. In the case, nonetheless, that you still maintain these questions are unintelligible, yet again, I can only apprise you of the requisites of accountable material by providing what in fact is a minimal background to understand their nature and ramifications. If you now understand they are intelligible questions, just answer, please. If not, either explain how these questions are not intelligible to you, that we may further clarify what are obvious issues, or rely upon the following further explanation of their context. In other words, I'm answering his questions beforehand, or his objections beforehand. If the business of banking were truly conducive to the general, common purposes of society, which purposes at least are to prosper to our capacities and without denial of just reward for our production, first, I suppose, it would be gentlemanly in return to thank you for your 4th of July email and PDF, which of course again responds not to our questions, but in which, instead, you pretend to justify your evasion by merely asserting that our questions were unintelligible, that they are unfocused, and that they don't even request recorded material. Of course, they do. The reason you have not answered these fundamental questions is they are so focused and conclusive as to inspire worldwide indignation should you be unable to provide satisfactory answers, which of course is impossible, because the afore-described obfuscation is absolutely unjustifiable. We indeed even expect that you will never answer to our satisfaction, not because, as you have intimated, you are not obligated to respond to unfocused, unintelligible requests for veritable opinions or tenets of banking, but instead are only obligated to respond to requests for recorded information. Thus, in order to comply with the restriction you evidently intend to exercise, we indeed have even provided versions of our same questions, which in each and every case indeed request the stipulated recorded information. If it were the case, nonetheless, that our questions are in fact unintelligible, we wonder still how it is that in this further reply, you, on behalf of the bank, do not instead ask for clarification of whatever expressions or concepts may have been perceived in fact to be unintelligible. Obviously, nonetheless, regardless of any purported question of intelligibility, the documentation your response cited could hardly explain or justify either the bank's rightful monetization of our promissory obligations, or, on the other hand, what would have to be its obfuscation of monetary process. For, just for example, neither your cited documentation nor any other historic documentation which even the most diligent scholars can be aware of ever explains a very plain thing: whether or not the purported bank ever once gives up lawful consideration in the creation of money, commensurable with every debt the banking system obviously does indeed claim from us. It is not even difficult to answer these questions then, Mr. Norman. As we have carefully explained, however, both the whole fate of the world and even a purported fact or possibility of representation in governments installed to power always to preserve this ever unjustifiable obfuscation, despite its perpetually unjustifiable consequences, all this hangs in the balance of the answers to these 4 questions. You merely declare, furthermore, that these questions are unintelligible. But the reasons you might do so, too, are plain. Our subsequent questions were even plainer, for they merely ask first yet again if indeed you do claim the banking system gives up lawful consideration in the creation of money, and in turn, whether and how you dispute any of the obvious related facts to the answers to those questions, which we anticipated and provided in lieu of your refusal to answer. In our own open, truthful disclosure to the bank. We, of course, nonetheless, perfectly well understand how and why a willful disclosure of justifying answers to these due questions may never be offered by any purported banking system. For these questions reveal the very adverse core purposes of purported banking, the answers to which, therefore, invalidate not only everything about purported banking, but even the claims of the purported banking system to collect upon its falsified debts.